And Donald Trump is facing 88 criminal counts on retaining classified documents and obstruction, hush money payments, and election interference. So when is he actually going to go to trial? The answer is who knows. All four of the criminal cases are up in the air right now. In South Florida, Judge Aileen Cannon has yet to reschedule the initial May 20th trial date. In D.C., Judge Tanya Chutkan is on hold until the Supreme Court rules on immunity. In Georgia, as we just discussed, the case is now back in the hands of D.A. Fani Willis, but likely won't go to trial before the election. And in New York, which was supposed to start on March 25th, Trump's defense, along with the DA prosecuting him, are now asking for a delay. So what gives? Joining me now, NBC's Dasha Burns reporting from West Palm Beach, Florida. Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, and creator of The Circus. Also Tia Mitchell, Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Tia, because we just ended with Georgia, I'd like to stay there for a second. Do you have an indication of what needs to happen before DA Fani Willis might be able to go to trial?
Well, first and foremost, she has to make a decision how she's going to respond to Judge McAfee's ruling today. He was very clear. If she and her office want to remain in charge of this case, she's got to part ways with Nathan Wade. So we need to hear, is she going to do that? Is she going to appeal? Of course, the defense attorneys for some of for Trump or any of his co-defendants could also appeal. So that's kind of in the short term what needs to happen. But there are a lot of moving parts with a lot of defendants, a lot of charges. So it's nowhere near close to time for a trial in this Georgia Trump election interference case.
So, Dasha, what's interesting is that Donald Trump's team has been using these court appearances as campaign fodder. And the campaign and his team around him says it's been working. It's helped him in the polls in a way that maybe other events would not have. So counterintuitively, how do they feel about all these delays? Is there a side of them that wants to see something go to trial so that they can use it as a public display, in their words, of vilification?
Well, look, there is a difference between how this played to the primary audience versus the general election audience, right? I don't think you're going to see any swing voters wearing a Trump mugshot T-shirt. However, they see what we have watched unfold here as a possible tactic to do what they've done time and time again, which is to muddy the waters. And while there's no trial starting as soon as they might have liked to see, there is this opening that was created by this ruling with some of the language that Judge McAfee had in here. I mean, he was using phrases like odor of mendacity, saying that there's a financial cloud of impropriety, potential untruthfulness found here, questioning Willis's judgment over and over again in these 20-something pages. And that does a political and court of public opinion favor to Trump and his legal team, because they can use that. They can point to that and sort of sow those seeds of doubt in the process, in the prosecutor and in the institution. And when it comes to these trials, look, I mean, very practically, it was going to be very difficult for him to juggle the campaign trail and having to show up in court. And they were trying to figure out strategies for how to do that. So now that's delayed a little bit. And that is, in the end of the day, what they want. They want to be able to use this to say, hey, they're coming after me. Biden's trying to imprison his political opponents. But at the same time, they do want to be out there talking to voters and rallying the base and getting folks excited to vote. So right now, they're kind of in a solid spot in terms of their planning. And again, the courtroom drama doesn't play quite in the same way to the general election voter, the swing voter, as it did to the sort of MAGA base. Katie.
Mark, what do you think? Does this have an effect on the voters by and large?
Well, what would have an effect on the voters, Katie, is if there was a conviction. We know from research and data that would tend to change voters' minds, including a lot of Republicans. The reality is now that is highly unlikely. I mean, even if there were a conviction, which now seems unlikely there'll be any trials, but even if there was, that would be on appeal. So I think that what has happened here is that the bottom line strategy for the Trump team was to delay everything as long as possible. The irony is that it's the prosecution and not the defense that's helped delay these trials. I mean, it delayed the Georgia case by 2 months, and we now know in the New York trial, because of an SDNY screw-up, that they're going to have to delay. So the prosecution has been helping out the Trump team by the delay. And so all of this just means that ultimately the bottom line is going to be, which, by the way, I think in terms of the legal matters, I think that they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent. But politically, what is important is that Trump is beaten at the ballot box, not so much the jury box.
I'll explain that.
Well, because I think that ultimately voters think that, I mean, certainly they feel that a lot of these legal prosecutions are politically tainted. And by the way, any political prosecution that's successful will only make Trump a martyr and I think enhance his power, certainly within the MAGA base. And I just think that there'd be a sort of unrest if Trump were denied his political evolution, if that's ultimately what happens at the ballot box, because of a legal precedent. And that's why I think we could see real violence and unrest. So my preference would be that that Trump be beaten at the ballot box and done so clearly and completely.
The hush money case could potentially still go to trial over the summer. There are questions about if the Supreme Court, Mark, rules on immunity, whether that could potentially go to trial if it goes back to Judge Chutkan in September or October, right ahead of the election. And I've been stuck on something that our friend Claire McCaskill has said about that. She thinks it would be a benefit for Donald Trump to go to trial that late, just ahead of the election, because so many voters tune in those moments, and he would be able to effectively argue that he's being unfairly treated, politically targeted right ahead of the election. It would look unsavory to at least she says, a significant portion of voters. Do you share that sentiment?
I think Claire is very savvy, and I think that's exactly right. And by the way, that's why the DOJ has a provision within its recommended rules, which is that you don't prosecute cases within a certain window in front of an election. And that's exactly what would happen, I think. And I think it would, as Claire said, I think it would inure to Trump's benefit to have any kind of legal proceedings happen anytime after Labor Day.
Well, it's a DOJ rule, but the judge does not have to follow that. The judge has no authority or obligation to stand by what the DOJ says in that matter. So we'll see if Judge Chutkan schedules it anyways. Tia, what is your sense of that?
Yeah, I think that most judges will be hesitant to have a trial that is just getting underway close to an election. I think the question is, do any of these trials get going, perhaps in the summer, late summer, where you could see a judge envisioning being able to wrap up in a way that doesn't fall too close to the election? That's the question. Again, we've mentioned some of the cases in New York that might be a little bit more primed to get going sooner rather than later. But again, the Georgia case, the D.C.-based case about January 6th, even the case down in Florida with the documents, it just doesn't seem like they'll be able to get underway without coming up against the election, or likely some of them, election notwithstanding, they're just not going to be ready before November.
Dasha, has anybody on the Trump team expressed anything about a late trial to you, what they would feel, how they'd feel about it?
They're all, for the most part, all for it politically, right? There's always this divide. The lawyers are dealing with the legal ramifications of this, but politically, it gives him the airtime. It gives him those moments, and it gives him the opportunity to flip the script. We've already seen this on the campaign trail, Katie, and say, President Biden is trying to imprison his political opponents. He's compared himself to Alexei Navalny. So this would allow him a platform to continue to hammer that case. And one thing that I keep hearing from operatives and advisors is that the fact, Katie, that there are so many cases right now, both criminal and civil, they think is actually better for Trump than if there were just one singular case that everybody could follow all the developments minute by minute. It's really difficult for everybody to keep up with what's happening, and it allows the Trump team to sort of muddy the waters and get their messaging to cut through more so than these sort of the legal minutia that nobody really wants to pay attention to, Katie.
Dasha Burns, Tia Mitchell, and Mark McKinnon, thank you very much.